Let's write some warm-ups. We're gonna go through my 3 warm-up methods that I use, and we're gonna write some examples. So let's begin. Team, you're here with Coach Chicken Legs. I'm gonna knock up a bunch of different warm-up types for you. Let's talk about the 3 main warm-ups that I use, and then we'll get some examples out. So we've got 3. We have my 2-step warm-up, 4-step warm-up, and 6-step warm-up. Now we've talked a little bit in the past about how these work and why. We're gonna touch on that again just so you're not left in the dark. My 2-step warm-up is used when we're short on time. It's a really good warm-up for when clients come in late, or if I have a really big session planned and a lot of the movements are a bit more relaxing or a little bit easier, or they build up. So we don't need to do as much of a warm-up because we might be doing a mobility day or a focusing on technique because we're learning a new thing day, whatever. But these are really good for when we're short on time, and they can last anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes. So if I've got a group class running and 2 people come in 5 minutes past the time I've started the class, I might get them to do one of these warm-ups so that they can jump in, but they're not disrupting the class either. So for a 2-step, there's 2 goals, okay? We're gonna try to loosen any tight shit, and then we're going to warm up the joints that is going to be used today, the main joint, okay? So what does that mean? Well, whenever I'm doing warm-ups, I kind of have a plan in mind. I kind of have a system, some steps. So each of these warm-ups are trying to do something very specific. So the first thing that they're doing is we're identifying which movement is the main, or movements that are the main movements of the day. So that's my first step. Okay. Now, we've talked about on this channel, and we will always talk about this on this channel, the 9 movements that I like to use. Again, there are thousands of different ways to unpack this. This is just the 9 that have made the most sense for me over my career. We have push, pull, plank, squat, hinge, lunge, and we have ground to standing, gate, and crawl. I'm gonna get really good at writing those out one day because I do them 1,000 times a day when I'm telling people how to do this. So identifying which of the main movements your session is built around is step 1 of why I have these, the kind of underlying what we're doing for these warm-ups. If it is, for example, a push-pull day or a bench press and pull-up day or whatever, you'll probably find that the main movements are in this space. If it's a leg day where we're doing lots of running and squatting and lunging and deadlifting, it might be a squat, hinge, lunge day, okay? Or a squat, lunge, hinge, gate day, whatever. We're gonna identify what's the main thing, what's the main movement we're gonna use, okay? And then we're not gonna deep dive into each of these movements. I've done that in the past, and we will do more videos on that in the future. But for now, let's just keep it easy, and we're gonna do a squat day, okay? So lower body squat day, yeah? So first things first, we identify the movement, which in this case is squat. So movement has been identified. Fantastic, well done us. So we now know it's a squat day. Squat. The next thing I wanna do is I'm gonna think about what's the main joint that's being used for the squat day. So step 2 is what's the main joint. Now, in this case, we're gonna look at it's the knee. Now, we know that ankle and hip play a factor in as well, but when we're looking at squatting or we're looking at a quad extension or lunging and things like this, the knee plays a big factor because it does the most amount of movement. Now, you could choose either of the other 2, but knee in my mind jumps out the most because it's going through the most range as we do that movement of squatting. So knee is the main joint, although you could put in ankle and hip if you wanted to. When we're thinking about the main joints that we look at as PTs, we always look at the ankle, we look at the knee, we look at the hip, we look at the spine, but mainly the T-spine. We look at the shoulder, we look at the elbow, And that's more or less it. We can look at the wrist as well, just less common. We want to stay in our scope of practice team. So ankle, knee, hip, spine, shoulder, elbow, and wrist are the main joints that we would look at, particularly when we're doing warm-ups in this case. We would choose out of those which of those couple of joints affects our main movement of the day most. Try to stay in scope of practice team. This stuff is all within your scope as a PT. Just try not to, as you get more and more educated, make sure you don't lean too far out of your scope, otherwise you can run into trouble. It is okay to refer out, but in this case, in a personal training setting, what we're talking about now is completely fine, okay? All we're doing is we're identifying a movement the client is doing, and we're identifying what joint they're doing. They're using the most. So we know now that the main joint of the squat is going to be the knee joint. It's a hinge joint for those who care. Don't worry about it. For those anatomy nerds, you absolutely love that stuff, but doesn't necessarily matter, particularly for the client doesn't really care. Step 3, we're going to think of the muscles above and below the joint. So what's above the joint and what's below the joint, okay? So we don't need to be an anatomist here. I don't need you to be like, oh, we've got the lateral vastus medialis or whatever. The quadricep muscle is all I really care about, or the thigh or the hamstring. Keep it simple so that way your client can understand what you're asking. If you're really big on anatomy, you want to say the soleus or the gastrocnemius or whatever, go for it. Okay, that's completely up to your prerogative, but clients like simple, so we keep it simple in these conversations. So what is the joint, the muscles above and below the joint? In this case, it's the calf, the hamstring, the quad, and maybe your tibialis anterior, which is your shin muscles, okay, your shin muscle specifically. What do we think is the tightest muscle, or the muscle that's gonna cop the most amount of work today? Your clients are really good at giving you this insight because usually they're pretty vocal. If they've got tight quads, you will have either found out with training through them in personal training setting, or they'll tell you that, oh geez, I've been told I have a tight hamstring, or this muscle's sore when I do X. If it is a bit ambiguous or a bit vague, you're not quite sure where the client might be sore or might be tight, choose the main muscle that's going to do the most amount of work today. So we know that we're doing squat, which is a big quadricep muscle. So I'm going to choose the quadricep as the main thing that I'm going to focus on in my underlying information of my 3 warm-up steps. So quadricep, beautiful, lovely. Big muscles often get tight. It's a good, safe bet between the soleus or the calf, between the calf and the quad, they're always tight between each other for most people. So it's never a bad thing. We're only loosening stuff up, so it's not a big deal. But step 4 of our process is we're now gonna loosen the tight shit. So, in this underlying back of house information, now that I know that we're doing squats, the knee joint's gonna be the main thing used and quad's the main muscle that's probably gonna be the most affected, I'm now gonna try to loosen that tight shit as much as I can. So I might foam roll the quad, I might do some voodoo flossing, I might do some static stretching, I might do some dynamic stretching, I could do some mobility drills, I could do some transverse movement drills, whatever. But we know that we're gonna try to loosen the tight shit to give our client the best chance of performing the movements well. So when I'm choosing and making warm-ups, these are things that I am considering in back of house. Now, I don't care as much if you know this, as far as the ability to demonstrate it. I do care that you understand that what we're trying to, what's the purpose of the warm-up in those 4 steps, okay? Because when we go through, we understand what the movement is, we know what the joint is, we understand what muscles may become tight and what's being used, and we understand what will need to be loosened and or tightened. But if they've got an inability or something that's loose, we can tighten it up. Then it makes it much easier to justify what we're doing in our warm-ups, and it gives us far more cognition and more understanding of what we're actually trying to do as a personal trainer. So it's just giving us steps to be able to break down what we're trying to do. So keep in mind, again, I don't need you to necessarily remember that, but this is going to be at the core of all these different warm-ups. So let's jump back to our 2-step warm-up and let's keep it simple. So my first thing I'm gonna do, I know, for example, let's say it's still a squat day. my client has come in late and I'm running a group class. So what I'm gonna do is I know that it's mainly as a squat day, the joint's the main thing we're gonna use is the knee. I know the quadriceps gonna be used the most, and I'm worried that they may have tight quads, or their quads are gonna become tight from today's session, okay? What we're gonna do is we're gonna loosen the tight ship. So I'm just gonna ask the client to foam roll their quad for a minute on each side, okay? So that's 2 minutes in total. Then I'm gonna choose the most relevant cardio machine to perform for 3 to 5 minutes, more likely 3 in this case. Now, when we think of cardio machines, you're not limited to just the static machines. Anything the client can do at low intensity for 3 minutes that's using the main muscle we've been thinking about, which is quad, to the best of its ability. Luckily with squat, a really easy one to think about is riding a static bike. So we can either do an aero bike, where they can do a stationary riding bike, doesn't matter, but that's quad, it's warming it up for 3 minutes and they've done a bit of loosening, that'll do. That's a nice, quick, short and sharp. Now, these are not my preferred forms of workout because they are just enough. They're just the bare minimum of getting my client to the dance. This is they must do at least this before we can even play. The warm-up is so crucial in keeping my clients safe that I'm so insistent on it because it's doing so many things that we'll get into in a moment, but they can do no less than this. The absolute minimum I'll allow is if they're super, super late, I may skip the loosening part of it and just get them to do 3 to 5 minutes on a relative cardio piece of equipment. That's okay, but notable, okay? So for step 2, it's 2 things. I'm going to loosen the tight ship and I'm gonna put them on a cardio machine that's relevant. So if you can think of a couple of movement patterns, like for example, push. So if we're doing a bench day or a push day, I might get them on the ski erg, which is where you hold the handles. That is a cardiovascular machine that you'll find in most gyms these days. You might have a back day, so I'll put them on the row machine. You might have a deadlift day, so I'm getting them to do kettlebell hip thrusts with a light kettlebell. You might be doing an overhead press day, so I might give them alternating shoulder presses with light dumbbells or light kettlebells, whatever. The trick is light and for a long time, which is this 3 to 5 minutes. I don't want to kill them. I'm not trying to get them to our 85% plus heart rate, which we consider in this space a high heart rate. I want to keep them between 60 and 75%, which is in this case a low heart rate. We're just warming them up. We're just trying to get the body moving. Hey team, if you're liking this content, what I need you to do is follow us, support us, leave comments. We're here to help programmers be better at programming, make coaches and PTs the best of the best that we can, and it starts with programming and it starts with you. Share, like, subscribe. We're trying to give the body an idea of what's happening. That's all it is, slowly warming the client up. So that's my 2-step warm up. Short, sharp, to the point, and it will bloody do, is kind of the attitude towards it. It will do. It's used as a break glass in case of emergency. When we start having a bit more time, we start looking at our 4-step warm-up. Now, our 4-step warm-up, again, the same principles. We're identifying the main movement, we are thinking of the main joint, what muscles are above and below it, and we're loosening tight shit and tightening loose shit. But we're gonna do it in 4 steps. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, and Step 4. The first thing I'm gonna do is a linear movement related to the movement of the day. So we're gonna stick on this lower body squat day so we don't have to keep changing and breaking it down. But in a squat day, the main movement is, who would have thought, squat. We're lucky that the movement squat is also an exercise you can do. Now, what do I mean by linear? Linear means that your shoulders, there it goes. Your shoulders and your hips don't move away from each other at any point. They stay in a line. Now, this is something we've talked about a lot in the past, but all I need you to understand in this context is my shoulders and my hips stay together, okay? So when one moves, so too true does the other. The good thing with this is that almost all the movements we do in the gym setting is linear, or very close to linear. when we start looking at the other version of this transverse, it's usually sports related, and that's when your hips and shoulders move away from each other. But in this case, shoulders and hips stay as one piece. Your trunk stays together, okay? So linear, again, most common movements, we want to choose something that's squat related. I might do a body weight squat. Who would have thought? I might do a kettlebell squat. I might do a deck squat where I come all the way to the floor and back up. Doesn't matter, okay? Whatever. We're doing a movement that is related to the main movement of the day, linear. Next, I'm gonna do some form of mobility. Now, mobility and flexibility similar. Mobility just means to create space in this context. Flexibility, very similar, to create length. So we're gonna choose a mobility exercise that is related to the main joint of the squat, which in this case we know is the knee. Okay? So I'm gonna create space or mobility around the knee. I could alternatively choose the muscle as well. So if I know the muscles above and below the joint, in this case is the quads, the hamstrings, the calf, the most likely one being used today is the quad. So I can create mobility in either of these. So I could, for example, for the knee, I could do a standing quad stretch. I could do a half kneeling stretch. I could do a lateral twist, or I could do some seated reaches, whatever, but quad centric and trying to create length in, okay? So this is why the first thing we talked about is so relevant, because I know that squats is the main movement and joints around that squat movement is the knee. I know that the quad is the main muscle that we're gonna look at today, and we know to loosen the tight shit, which in this case will likely be the quad. If the client, again, has something outrageously tight that we already know about, like a glute or whatever, a hamstring, we can start loosening that as well. For our third step of our 4-step warm-up, we're gonna do a transverse movement. Now, transverse movement is just will I spell that right? Probably not, knowing me. A transverse movement is just a movement related to the exercise of the day, being squat, but has rotation. Transverse. We briefly touched on it, but the hips and the shoulders move away from each other. So they're not staying aligned. Think about sports as the best example. When you see an AFL player who's pushing someone away and running with a ball, they're not aligned with themselves. They're moving through the transverse plane, which for the anatomy nerds is the one that separates us from trunk across, okay? So if you think about a tennis player who's hitting the ball and twisting, if you're thinking about a shot putter who's throwing the ball and twisting, transverse movements are really, really good at getting our client to be functionally strong and injury repellent. So we like transverse movements because they build farmer's strength, is the words we like to use around here, and it helps clients understand the basic principles. But farmer strong is transverse, okay? We love it. Now, we can't load it heavily. We're nowhere near as strong transverse in rotation as we are in a line. That's why all of our big powerlifting movements are in the linear space. But transverse is really good for keeping us strong. Think about like a farmer or a gymnast. They're quite powerful in a lateral space. So we wanna just create some form of rotation around the squat, okay? So I could do a deep squat, and at the bottom of the squat, reach and twist, okay? I could do a squat with a jump and turn. Think about sports that might do squatting. So I might squat and let one knee cave in slightly. I might do a squat and have a little bit of off balance and twist as I come down. It doesn't matter, but some form of rotation in relation to the squat movement. Now, when in doubt, think about sports. Think about perhaps surfers have to go from a board, lunge up, and then squat into a surfing pattern. You could get them to do a movement similar to that. We could get them to do a squat and jump with a turn. You could do my favorite, which is squat down nice and low and twist and reach. That's fine. Try to keep it simple. Try to keep it basic. And the best thing to do with transverse movements is practice them yourself and try to have 2 transverse movements per movement pattern that we have, which is of the 9 patterns. Again, let's not overcomplicate it, but for transverse, it's just a movement that is shoulders and hips are not staying aligned. In this case, we're gonna do a deep squat with reach, twisting reach, which is like that. Easy, it just creates mobility in the spine, creates mobility in the body. We're gonna bring it home. We're gonna do our final fourth step, which is we're gonna come back to the linear movement that is related. So we're gonna choose a new linear movement pattern that is related to the squat. If it's a squat lunge day, might be where I chuck my lunge movement. Doesn't really matter, but I'm trying to bring everything home. So we've done the main movement, we've gotten them to do a bit of mobility, we've added some functional longevity and flexibility and health strength training, some farmer strong training, and now we're bringing it home so the client and the body now know what we're trying to do. If I did a body weight squat at the beginning, I might do a goblet squat at the end. If I might do a squat box jump, nice and slow. If we're doing a movement that might be new to the client, let's say we're doing box jumps and we know they haven't done them before, we might do some practice rounds on the box within this warm-up space. Now, each of these might take you anywhere between 1 to 3 minutes, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, depends. Why I really like step 4 and why clients of mine being personal trainers often rely on this particular warm-up style is because we can put it into a circuit and let the client look at the whiteboard or just move through these movements for 10 minutes or 11 minutes or whatever, 7 to 11 minutes, and warm themselves up, and they can treat it like a circuit, which is really good for group setting. I can get the whole group to move through each of these things individually, spending about 1 minute to 2 minutes on each. That's cool, that's fine. But it's more commonly seen done in a group setting in a circuit. So in this particular sense, I could get the whole group to do 10 bodyweight squats. I could get them all to do 30 seconds of standing quad or 40 seconds or a minute standing quad stretch on each side. I could then get them to do deep squats with rotational reaches, and then I could get them to finish off with doing a goblet squat, which is a squat with a kettlebell for 10 reps, and get them to repeat that as many times through as they'd like for the next 7 to 11 minutes, depending on what you've factored into your program. Really good because some clients who are feeling very energetic can go through as many, like 3 or 4 times. The people who are feeling a bit more lethargic can go through it once or maybe twice, and it will give you a good idea of where people are in relation to the skill of the day. If you're in like a pre-season or a off-season and you're teaching a new team or a new group new skills, for example, let's say our clients have never done goblet or front squats before, we might use this time to go over some of those movements to develop their understanding before we load them heavily. When we look at long-term programming, we do break stuff down into quarters, but we won't get into that today. There are some videos around it though. So that's 4-step. Nice and simple, linear, mobility, transverse, then back to linear. Okay. The good news is, team, is although this can sound complicated, once you know the rules, it's very easy to apply. Remember that our whole purpose is just to get the body to understand what we're trying to do for the day, and we're trying to loosen the tight shit. We just need to do it efficiently, okay? Pause the video if you need, if it's getting too complicated, but it will make a bit more sense when I write out some live examples. So, 6-step is my personal favorite and is the one I use most commonly for PTs specifically. Now, remember that in the background, we're doing 4 things where main movement, we are looking at our joint, we are looking at our muscle above and below, and we're looking at loosening tight shit and tightening loose shit. Loosen tight, sweet. Remember, that's our overall goal. That's what we're trying to do. That's the underlying message of these different warm-ups. The 6-step is anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes long, and I use it for most of my PTs because I sneak in a lot of mobility work into this particular program, this warm-up style. I sneak in a lot of a movement understanding. So if my clients, for example, are in an off season, so they're no longer in a camp going towards their sport, or they are perhaps more deconditioned, or perhaps they are clients who are going through a weight loss journey and have a lot of don't have the skills yet developed that you would some of us might have in the gym, we use this 6-step process to work on stuff. Very, very good, used more by higher end trainers. There are a ton of variants on the 6-step. I just find 6 steps is easier to remember for clients and saves us a lot of time. So here are the steps for the 6-step warm-up. Okay, so step 1 is loose and tight shit. Step 2 is linear movement. Step 3 is a mobility movement. Step 4 is another mobility movement. Step 5 is a transverse movement. And finally, we bring it back home with a linear movement. Short, sharp, and simple. So, loosen the tight shit. This is about foam rolling. This is stretching. This is voodoo flossing. We know what the tight movement is because we've run it through our 4 steps in the background. What's the main movement of the day? Again, we'll stay to squats. We know what joints, which is going to be the knee. We know the muscles, the quads, the hamstrings, and the lower leg, the actual calf itself. And we know to loosen tight shit and tighten loose shit. That's a good rule of thumb. So I might spend 2 minutes foam rolling or stretching or doing the mobility, the lengthening drills. I then go to the linear movement that is related to the day. So we might do body weight squats because I'm trying to get the body to understand what it's doing if we're doing barbell squats or any squatting movement that's relevant. I want the client to go through the patterns so that way if there's any niggles, they can identify them then and there. That's really important. If your client's moving through these patterns and they are showing signs of discomfort, that's a good sign to stop and address and see what's happening. This is why we like doing this in our warm-up. Our mobility is looking at the joint or the muscle around the space. I do 1 joint and 1 muscle. So I might do in this case, for the muscle, I'll do a quad stretch. For the joint, I might do a distraction where you get the space being pulled apart by resistance bands. I could do more stretching around the muscle. It doesn't necessarily matter, but we're doing a stretch or a mobility drill around the joint and around the muscle that is related to the main movement of the day, which is squat. So we know that the knee is the main thing being used, so we're gonna do some mobility around it. We could do some banded pull work, we could do some stretching, we could do whatever. Okay, we can do some hamstring stretching if we're really concerned, but the main movement being quad of the day, we've got to focus mainly on the quad. We're going to do a transverse movement again, thinking about functional strength, thinking about longevity, farmer strong, unbreakable, trying to make that client really strong in a transverse line. Again, we could do a deep squat with reaches, just kind of like we talked about. And then we're going to bring it all home with the main movement of the day back to linear. So we might do again our goblet squat. No bloody problem. Okay, so I love this form of warm-up team because you can do it in a group. You can walk your clients through each of these spaces. It gives us plenty of time to see where the client is for the day. We can work on some of the mobility issues that our clients aren't addressing or we need to address as their practitioner during the warm-up every session. We can do it with them if we want to keep ourselves feeling nice and fit and healthy. It gives our clients a way better understanding of what the purpose of the warm-up is. So that way when they come to see you, if you can just tell them a very, very brief why you're doing stuff. Oh, we do this because mobility around the joint's really important and we don't want to do that when we're cold. That's why we do it in the middle, but we also don't want to do it while we're ready to go because that's why we have linear at the end and why mobility is in the middle. Each of them are there for certain reasons. You don't need to know that. You just need to know that there's 6 steps. Loose and tight shit, linear, mobility, transverse, linear. I sometimes have my rehabilitation sessions, which are sessions that are completely built around rehab, that I might do in a recovery season for a group or a sporting team or a client. I might do a loosen the tight shit space. I then go to my linear, and then I could do 5 or 6 or 7 mobility exercises if I want, because this is where my mobility session's now built around. So I sometimes use my 6-step program and warm-up to help rehab clients as a whole session if my client is deemed to need it. Again, that's looking into future stuff, but it's just food for thought. Okay, so we're loosening tight shit, linear, mobility, transverse, then linear. So it becomes a lot easier. The more we use it in our language, the more you see it, it starts making sense because it really is the same thing, just expanded on each time.